Hi, Stella. We had your friend Graham Linehan on today. I guess we could both call him a friend now.
Yeah. I was really glad to have him on. And I didn't think he'd kind of come on because I don't think he kind of likes kind of long analytical conversations. But it was actually, I thought it was a nice conversation we had with him. And we brought him on mostly because of his book. He's got his book out, Tough Crowd. It's a great read. I really recommend people getting it for Christmas because it's a very good way for people to give it to their brothers or their uncles or their family members. And it's a way into trans through a comedy writer. And he writes a lot about being a comedy writer and, you know, the kind of the life he had. And then he brings trans into it. So it's not kind of a book about trans.
Yeah.
It becomes a book about trans. So it's a lovely read for people who mightn't be completely absorbed in the issue. But it was a good conversation I thought we had with Graham. He's a fascinating character.
Yeah. You've known him for many years. When did you guys meet?
Oh, we don't know each other for many years. Since 2018, we knew each other. He got into gender the very same year as I got into gender. And like I say, weirdly enough, my mother knows his mother. And that's very Irish.
Yes.
And I know his sister and stuff. But yeah, we became friends. I suppose we're both Irish and we're both from Dublin. And there was kind of a kinship almost immediately with the two of us. And we've become friends, you know, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of him, actually.
Yeah, he's very honest. He speaks with a real candor and like an enthusiasm and a kind of a truthfulness. And that's something I really appreciated about our conversation. And it was really interesting to hear like all the kind of twists and turns. And of course, he's taken a huge personal like a lot of personal criticism. And I mean, he was telling us that he's had something like 75 hit pieces written about him just in Pink News alone. So, you know, I really admire his willingness to speak about something he feels very passionate about, that he thinks is telling the truth, and doing so at a great personal cost. You know, it's really a big deal.
Could I say something about that? Because I got to know him, like he was so huge in 2018. He hadn't yet been cancelled. You know, the cancellation was coming. Yeah. And he was so huge and so famous, and everybody thought people would follow his lead. You know what I mean? That it was like when J.K. Rowling joined the debate. Everybody thought people will join in. They didn't. But he was the first very famous person to speak up. And I remember he became a kind of a HQ for gender, that everybody would send him things to plug. And so he would be plugging this and plugging that and plugging the other, just out of generosity and trying to lift everybody up with him. But what that looked like to the world was he was obsessed with gender, rather than people were messaging him constantly, please plug this, please plug that, please lift this, please retweet this, please this. So he was getting that all the time, and I saw it. And he would continuously, because he's kind of got that generous, and as he calls himself, the white knight thing, he likes to save people. And so he was continuously retweeting and plugging things all the time. And then he became obsessed, as you would, as we all did. I certainly did. But I do think that gets lost on people, that there was a generosity at the heart of that, you know?
Yeah, totally. So I'll read his bio, and then we'll let listeners kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, as they say. So Graham Linehan was born in Dublin, and he's the mastermind behind beloved sitcoms Father Ted, The IT Crowd, Black Boots, and Motherland. His Substack is dedicated to monitoring the extremes of gender identity ideology, and he also co-hosts the highly successful weekly YouTube show, The Mess We're In, which has garnered a remarkable 1.5 million views in just 3 years. So here's our conversation with Graham Linehan.
Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens.
Well, hello there, Sasha and Graham.
Hi.
This has been a long time coming. I think anybody who follows me and Graham would know that we're good pals and have been really since we first met each other over the trenches of gender. But funnily enough, my mother knows Graham's mother, so it's very Irish, really. And I know his sister.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyway, you're very welcome, Graham, and we're delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. This is going to be a funny one for me because I kind of know you too well, but we're going to let Sasha lead the way maybe on this one. But I think I'm particularly delighted you've come on at this point because you've just written this book. And I think this book is very, very important because it gives a proper representation of who you are and where you came from. And I think there was an awful lot of misinformation and disinformation about you in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the, as far as I'm concerned, the most important line in the book is that I am the victim of village gossip on a global scale, as are we all. We've all been suffering because of this, the Chinese whispers spread by trans rights activists, with their kind of resulting effects on our careers and on our sanity. So I realized that Twitter never did it. I never seemed to be able to explain myself on Twitter. Even my Substack, which I when I was banned from Twitter, I would update myself constantly, sending out posts almost as much as I used to send out tweets, but like, sorry, I can't remember where I was going. But like, yeah, I mean, for me, it's just been kind of firefighting, trying to explain what I believe, trying to explain that it's not bigotry, it's concern for these kids and other victims of this movement. But nothing was sinking in to the extent that even my closest friends and sometimes family members would repeat to me rumors and lies that had been spread about me. So I realized a book was the only way I could do it.
Yeah, and you've been in this gender conversation for a really long time. You and I have only interacted, I think, once. We connected once and talked on the phone, I believe, some years ago. But I'm wondering, when you started to notice something amiss regarding the trans debate, did you think that there was a risk in speaking out, or was the backlash you received a bit of a shocker to you? Because I think a lot of us feel uncertain of what is going to happen if we speak out about this. So can you take us back, I guess, to what did you notice? When did you speak out? And did you anticipate how detrimental it was going to be on kind of a professional level for you?
Well, I think I followed a similar trajectory that a lot of people follow in this fight, or the people who decide to enter it after a while, who don't have such a personal or professional connection as you guys do. And that's basically, you research it. You look into the issue and you see if you've missed anything, and you listen to the arguments and test them. And I did spend a long time doing that and trying to figure out if I had got it right or not. I remember one of the arguments I found extremely convincing when I first heard it, and have since discarded, was the idea that there's always been trans people about. They're just braver now, and that kind of stands up for about 10 seconds before you realise it's nonsense. Because to put it one way, I really think Shakespeare would have noticed them. Because he noticed everything else in humanity. The fact that he missed this one, I just don't think it's likely. So, and there's lots of other examples of that. There's never really, there's cross-dressing, of course, and there's dysphoria. But I hadn't seen, it was only with this movement that I realized they were trying to say there was actually a part of humanity that were quote unquote trans. And I in the early days I kind of thought, well, yes, that's probably true in the sense that some people are transsexuals, and they need to go through these extremely grave changes to their body in order to quell some restlessness in their mind. I thought that's fair enough. But soon I realised that they weren't the ones being talked about. There was a kind of a new cohort, which was transgender, which really meant anything anyone wanted it to mean. And it was around then that I started thinking, hang on a second, because it didn't really have, it didn't feel truthful, and it also felt too vulnerable to being hijacked by bad people, which is exactly, I think, what's happened. The examples of male sex offenders in women's prisons and various different types of people who are using this movement to really just get what they want, So once I realized there was all these things going on, I was getting braver and braver. And I guess the final, thing that pushed me over the edge was knowing that things were being done to children that I simply, did not agree with. I couldn't find any. Sorry, Stella.
No, well, I'm very interested. I suppose I wanted to I wanted a little bit of a glimpse of where would you have been at, let's say, in the 90s. I know in the 90s would have been, I presume, the Father Ted heyday. And you would have been, I presume, schmoozing with all the other comedy writers. I don't know what your life was like. But what would have been your perception of trans then? Like, if you could just...
Non-existent. Like, I didn't even know it was a thing. I knew there were... I knew about transsexualism, but I hadn't really... the cliche, they always say this is a tiny minority of people. And sure, it was a tiny minority of people, and it didn't really affect me, and it just wasn't an issue the way it became, So it was only then, I think possibly, if I'm being completely honest, the moment where I realised that something was up was when I did the IT Crowd episode, because there was an episode where I had a trans character, and interestingly, I think we did a lot of things that would be considered great. We cast a cis woman, although I would never use that word. We cast a woman as the trans woman, and the character really loved him, her, and at the end he kind of destroyed his own chance of happiness by breaking up with them because he couldn't get past that. Now at the time, that all felt right, it all felt like a good story. It felt sympathetic. Mm-hmm. I did end it with a huge fist fight between them, which didn't win me many fans.
I know that was very, very funny. Is that the same episode that had the internet?
Yes, the internet in the box.
Which is so funny.
Yeah, which is one of the most kind of standout, beloved episodes, and Channel 4 banned it, because of this story.
Do you know this? Do you know this?
No, tell me.
It's very funny, basically, because I always think of myself. You tell it, Graham. It's just very funny.
Well, the whole show is kind of about like people who know a lot about computers and people who don't know a lot about computers, mm-hmm. and unfortunately, the person who's the boss in the office is the one who doesn't know about computers. Okay. So the two IT guys managed to convince her that they actually own the internet, and it's in a small black box in the office, So, and she's kind of carrying it around, terrified that she'll drop it, that type of thing, and it was great. But at the same time, I just needed a parallel
side story.
Yeah. And so
that
I
was
always...
the trans.
That was the trans thing.
Trans story, yeah.
And it's based on this incredible story. You won't know this person, Sasha, but there was a very famous sports presenter over here called Des Linehan. Oh, he was a very manly man with a salt and pepper moustache, and he was quite the icon in the old days. And apparently he went on a date with a trans woman. And during the date, the woman said, "Oh, listen, just to tell you, I'm trans." And he apparently was eating, and he went, "Oh, okay." And he was such an unlikely person to not care and
To
just
not
kind
care,
of
yeah.
that we just always found it very funny. So
Yeah.
it stuck with me, and I used it for this storyline. But I guess if I could go back, I might take out the fight because that's what really annoyed people. But at the same time, again, I wouldn't.
It was funny. It was slapstick.
And I wouldn't do anything that these people tell me to do because they make it up as they go along. They make up what's offensive. They make up what's terrible, what's wrong.
And did you get a lot of pushback at the time? What was that, 2013, 2012, something
Yeah,
like that?
it was very early. And I did not understand, I didn't see why the pushback was so vicious. It was different to the pushback that I was used to. And I think what I'd done is I just kind of early on stepped into the developing ideology where people were deciding all these kind of
Concepts.
and thought terminating cliches and arguments. And I guess because of the pushback, and because every so often I'd get a message from some kid, I might like a piece of art by someone, and they would reply, "Don't want no likes from no transphobes, man," something like that. And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" So I was getting used to this.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking you were very big in the abortion debate in Ireland? It was only brought in 2016, 2018 or something. And you were a big figure in that debate. Well,
Yeah,
as far as I remember. And I think you saw some... and I think you saw some trans input there. Yeah. Is that right?
We absolutely. We went to a abortion rights march, and me and my wife would go back as often as we could. And we made this film for Amnesty Ireland that we were very proud of, and I really think had a huge effect on the debate. But once we went back, and there was a woman with a megaphone, and she was saying, "We want the state to pay for abortions," and everyone went, "Hooray!" And it was, "And operations for trans people." And we were like, "Oh, what?" It was like, where did that come from? And that was like the first sign I had that trans rights activists were deliberately latching on to women's issues to try, what's the word, forced teaming? And I saw that happening, and I thought, this is weird. And the other thing I noticed happening towards the end of the debate was that people started saying, Glinner is a TERF. People who were in the same fight. Glinner is a TERF. And I had
What year was this, Graham? Around.
Do you remember when the referendum was?
I should know. I'll look it up. It's presumably either 2018 or 2016. I really should know this.
Okay.
Abortion referendum Ireland. Let's all do it.
Okay. Yeah, it's 2018. Wow, it's so late.
Okay.
Yes.
Like abortion was only legal in Ireland in 2018. Extraordinary.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's right, and it was my first. It was the first experience I had of something I've become very used to since, which is if you have a certain kind of profile in a fight like this, then people will try and find something to undermine you. And that was the first time that happened. Glinner is a TERF. So it was around then, I think, that I started thinking, what does TERF mean? And looking it up and looking at the arguments and finding out what people thought. And I think the very first thing that I shared that got me cancelled was an article by Heather Brunskill-Evans that seemed incredibly reasonable and was full of that thing that we all used to do, but we realised it didn't matter, which was, of course, trans people need to be this and that, but at the same time, something I gave up after a while. But like even framed in that extremely thoughtful and compassionate way, that was it for me. That was when the attacks began.
So when you started being called a TERF at this protest or this rally, had you already been sharing your views and sharing that Heather Brunskill-Evans piece, or was that just based on the IT crowd episode that we were discussing a moment ago? Like, where was this idea in people's minds coming from that you were a TERF even back then?
I should make it clear. It didn't happen at the rally that I was. This was all happening online.
Generally, okay.
Yeah. But I think it was just a combined things. People were suspicious about me because I I might make a tweet that goes, hang on a sec, what does this mean? Or what do you mean here? And then when I finally kind of thought, okay, I'm jumping in with both feet, and shared the Heather Brunskill Evans thing, that's when they realized, oh, okay, he's all in.
We hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as we are. We just wanted to take a quick moment and say thank you to all of our listeners. Your support is the fuel that keeps this train running.
So please be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms.
And do be sure to check out the conversations that are happening on YouTube in the comments section. We think that we have some of the smartest, most engaged viewers out there, and we really appreciate all of the interactions.
Also, we produce additional bonus content every week for our listener community on Patreon. Go to widerlenspod.com and click on Join Our Listener Community. Your financial support means a lot to us.
And for those of you who are in need of parenting support and resources, we each have parent coaching membership groups, so please do check those out. You can find links to both of them at widerlenspod.com or in the show notes.
And of course, you can buy our book, When Kids Say They're Trans, out now in the UK and coming out very soon in the US.
Thank you so much. Now back to the show.
So this then kind of became your thing. I mean, you are, like, as a non-Irish person, I had heard of the IT crowd, so like I knew your name from that, but I wasn't very, very familiar with you really until this became your thing. And it's stuck with you and you've stuck with it. And I wonder why and how and what has this done? I mean, I imagine you've amassed a number of really interesting, great new friends. Like I always say, the most intelligent, thoughtful, and amazing people I could have ever imagined working with, I met through this work, right? Yeah. So, and I'm sure as a comedy writer, you knew some amazing and brilliant people, but like what has just becoming so deeply involved in this world done to you and for you? And with you.
Well, like I didn't want to get this involved. I didn't want my life to be covering this issue, but the stakes were so high that I just couldn't. The reason I was badgering people like John Ronson, who was an old friend, about this type of thing, is because, well, for instance, John Ronson wrote the book. So you think you've been publicly shamed?
Yeah. Which, in fairness, I think is a great book.
It's a very good book.
It's a really good analysis of public shaming on Twitter.
Yes.
It really is.
It is. So I thought he would be all over an issue where women were being shamed at an almost industrial level. Yeah. That it was like a production line of women being cancelled and their careers destroyed. I thought he would think, oh, here's my next big subject. But what I didn't realize is that he had already completely fallen for the whole thing, hook, line and sinker. And he just was not interested, because I think he knew that if he had covered the subject properly, he also would have been cancelled.
Do you think there was a point in the midst of all this? Because I presume you went to a series of famous people. And was there a point where you went, oh my God, I'm alone? Like, where are they? Because you knew these people very well.
Yeah, every single person I met, I thought they would be like, what? Children are being what? And I thought everybody would rush to help, especially since I knew so many people who called themselves feminists, who called themselves journalists, who called themselves, satirists, and none of them had any interest. And as a result, I remained kind of isolated and alone, and I just looked I was exposed, and they were able to say I was a kind of monomaniac on the subject. But all I've ever been trying to do is get other people to cover it and do their jobs, But as we all know, journalists just suddenly lost their pens when it came to this issue. Politicians outsourced their common sense to their young assistants. And even worlds that you would think would be impermeable, like therapy and other areas, were captured. And so it was, it took me a while to realize, but I was just on my own. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't convince anybody. The only person, and I put this in the book because I do think it's so melancholy, is that I managed to convince, and he agreed like this immediately, was James Dreyfus, who was an actor who was in one of my first sitcoms. And I said to him, will you sign this letter asking Stonewall for a more grown-up approach to this conversation, a less toxic approach? And he said, yep, absolutely, immediately. And he hasn't worked since he did that, because of me. It was my fault. Yeah. So, he, and all it was a letter asking Stonewall to just, can we calm the conversation down? And they replied with no within the day.
And I think he's gay, is he?
He is. James is gay. And also
which made it more relevant, Stonewall,
Absolutely, yeah. But, there was another guy who I contacted, Mark Gatiss, who is another gay actor. He's one of the guys behind Sherlock Holmes and... or the recent incarnation of Sherlock Holmes. Well, I think it's recent. It's probably about 15 years ago now. But and Doctor Who. And I said to him, will you sign this letter? And he went, I don't know. And then I haven't heard from him since, and his career is flying high and James hasn't worked,
Would you have, if you had had a crystal ball, was there a better way to go at it? I'm not saying this with my finger wagging. I'm just reflecting.
Sure.
Because it's gone so badly. Not through any fault of your own. It's gone so badly for all of us. I wonder,
I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying. I don't know. Maybe the first thing to do would have been to contact the Tavistock doctors, who I was suddenly in touch with. And say to them, but you know what it's like. Everything that everyone does is they just try and destroy you, Yeah.
Well, I'm interested. I mean, obviously, I imagine you're following some of the unfolding events in the US with our kind of comedy scene. And somebody like Dave Chapelle, for example, who has made... making jokes about something is very different than asking for a letter to be signed or a petition or, it's a different realm, right? But in the US, when comedians address the trans topic in their set, in their, performance, there's a lot of conflict about it. There's controversy. There's a lot of dust up, but their careers don't get damaged by it. I don't think they have. But I could be wrong. But what do you think? Because, you took this issue in a very serious direction. You didn't decide to just make a bunch of comedic jokes about it. You were trying to fix a really serious problem with what's happening to women and children. But what do you think about comics who play with this from a cultural level, and they don't really disappear or anything? If anything, I think, at least in the world that we're in, Dave Chapelle kind of became a hero despite some of his quite sexist jokes and other things that people may have issue with. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if I had I wasn't a stand-up comic, I was just a comedy writer. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, when you're a comedy writer, you need to build an infrastructure around you when you're making a show, which involves cast and crew and all sorts of things. So it wasn't like I could just go, hey, I want to do a comedy about this, and I mean, I'd love to have been able to do what Dave Chapelle did, because I remember one of the very earliest things he said was something along the lines of, you can be whatever you want, but how much participation do I need to bring to this again? Something like that. Yeah. And it was like, he got it. He just knew it. And there was that famous routine he did about all the gay people in the car with the lesbians. Yeah. And that showed to me that he understood the issue. He obviously had gay friends. He understood the history of gay relationships, like the way lesbians and gay men don't get on. It was all very funny, very charming. And then he would, in that same routine, he talked about queer. People who call themselves queer, which was the cues. Yeah. And again, bang on, just a kind of non-committal pansexual kind of omnisexuality, you know, that didn't really have anything to do with homosexuality or lesbianism, you know. So yeah, I'd love to have been in the position where I could make people laugh about the issue, but I just got all the avenues closed off to me, you know.
Yeah.
And like at one point, I thought of a funny idea. I thought, well, I'll do what all these men are doing for real. I will pretend to be a woman, and I'll get on a lesbian dating app, because all these men were doing it and invading these apps, and lesbians were complaining about it. So I thought, I'll do it, and I'll show them how easily it'll be done. It can be done. So I tilted my head, and I put she her in my bio, and joined her. And again, it was one of those occasions, and I don't really know how I could have guarded against this or changed this, but I was pointing at something, and everyone just looked at my finger, you know. There was a very funny thing. No one cared about the men doing it for real. They just concentrated on me doing it to show that the men were doing it for real.
Yeah.
You know, and so I got re-cancelled for that. You know, and I'm trying to say, they're doing it for real. They're doing this to lesbians. You know, I'm doing it to show it, but they're doing it for real. No one cared, and so every time I tried to approach it with humor, or to kind of go back to my old persona as a comedy guy, it was always a disaster.
You've been tainted. I mean, the reputation now is going to kind of overshadow any interesting commentary you're trying to make. You've been tainted.
Sure. Yeah. But what can I do? All I can do is keep fighting. I'm not going to, become a window cleaner. I'm going to keep fighting, and I kind of I hope that the stuff I'm putting on the Substack is valuable enough that people can look past whatever problems they have with me, but who knows?
We'd like to jump in here really quick and offer up a thank you to GenSpect, one of our sponsors. GenSpect is an international organization that offers a healthy approach to sex and gender. GenSpect recently hosted the Bigger Picture Conference in Denver, Colorado. There, they introduced the Gender Framework, a comprehensive, non-medical means of dealing with distress about gender issues. Go to genspect.org to learn more.
We'd also like to give a shout out to GETA, Gender Exploratory Therapy Association. If you're looking for a therapist for yourself or your child, check out the GETA directory. And if you're a clinician who is questioning the affirmation model and you're looking for resources and community, please consider joining GETA today. Visit genderexploratory.com to learn more. I wonder, though, I've often thought about where you were at, and I wonder, was there always a strong political undercurrent with you? Even that you got involved in the abortion. I remember I wouldn't have known you when you got involved in the abortion thing. And I remember at the time perceiving it as that's funny, your man from Father Ted into the abortion thing. It felt random at the time, if you follow me. So there was presumably a very strong political character there in you. That wasn't all just kind of funny comedy. You know what I mean? That must have been there.
Yeah, I genuinely believed in the abortion fight. I thought that, I was very heavily influenced by reading the Cider House Rules by John Irving when I was 16, 17. And before then, I had just thought abortion was the most terrible sin. And there was no conceivable reason that one would allow it or have it happen. And then I read that book, and it was so brilliantly argued that, the cliches we all know. There's no such thing as there's only such a thing as no such thing as no abortion. There's only unsafe abortions. Is that it? Something like that. I'm so tired. I can't remember.
Legal, yeah.
Yeah, it's like his argument in the book, and it's personified by the main character who does not agree with abortions himself, but because they're illegal at the time the book is set, he feels he has to do them. He has a moral duty to do them. I found that very powerful. And, from that moment, I just became an evangelist because I just thought it was such a backwards thing for Ireland not to have them. And then, when I was with my wife, our first child had a condition called acrania, which meant she would have been born without a fully formed skull, and would have lived only for a few moments and died. And the idea of putting my wife or a child through that was so horrific that it was both a terrible story, but also an opportunity in the sense that we could help show people that it's not a decision that people enter into lightly, and it's sometimes an incredibly necessary and important part of life. So yeah, it was that simple, really. It was just like, I didn't like. I guess one flaw I have, which has been pointed out many times, is that I have a bit of a white knight complex, and I don't like seeing women bullied. I find it infuriating because I was bullied, and I don't like seeing it happen to women, especially online, because when the discourse is so pointed and sharp and hostile, it makes it hard, I think, for a lot of women to enter into it, because that's that suits a certain type of man better than it suits a lot of women, So I wanted to feel like the internet was a safe place for women to speak, and it wasn't. It was just kind of over and over again. It was proving to be an incredibly hostile place. Like the previous time I got on my white steed and started trotting around the paddock was during a thing that happened called Gamergate. Oh, yeah. Which seemed to me from my perspective at that time, it seemed to me an attempt to get women to bully women off the internet. Subsequently, I found out it was a lot more complicated than that. I only really had half the story. And I think a lot of the people I was fighting were almost like canaries in the coal mine that were pointing out what we're fighting against now. A certain kind of censoriousness, a pearl-clutching kind of attitude towards computer games or culture, this kind of forced PC correctness over everything. I think some of the Gamergate fight was about getting women offline. In fact, swatting became big during Gamergate. I don't know if you know swatting, but it's when they phone in a fake armed, they try and get an armed response unit to come to your house by phoning in a fake call. So they'll say, oh, this guy's got a gun, can you come? And I was hearing all these stories about women opening their doors to SWAT teams.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and apparently the SWAT teams, their first priority is to kill the pet in the house, because the pet is a kind of chaotic element that they can't have going. So these women, there were these terrible stories happening, and people have been killed by swatting, So I just thought, oh my God, it's hard enough to be a woman online without thinking a SWAT team is going to turn up at your house, So I was fighting against it, but then as time went on, I realized that there was another thing going on, which was, as I say, it was it was the first time these authoritarian, very woke voices were starting to push other people about, and I didn't realize that I only had half the story. I ended up, Gamergate kind of ended, and I thought I'd done very well, I thought I'd been a real champion. But I now, later I kind of realized, actually, I think I might have, I might have not seen the wood for the trees there,
I want to just share something. This is a bit of a left field, but I'm interested in the way television writing has talked about or addressed the gender thing. And I remember a particular moment I was watching this show, called, oh gosh, it's a show about, it's like an animated show for adults about puberty. I can't remember the name of it now.
Big Mouth.
I loved that show. I was a huge fan of that show.
Yeah.
And then one episode, they took a character. Do you remember this, Graham? Like, have you seen the episode that I'm talking about?
I only know of the show. I've never watched it. It didn't look to me like I would enjoy it.
Okay, well, I thought it was fantastic. But then maybe 3 or 4 seasons in, it's about high schoolers and going through puberty, and they have the personified monsters representing female puberty and male puberty. So this very sexualized woman monster and this male monster who, you know, causes the boys to masturbate into pillows and weird things like that. I mean, it was clever. But there was one episode where there was a character who was suddenly identified as trans, though the character was clearly like a feminine boy previously. And there was a pamphlet, a personified pamphlet about puberty blockers. Not tongue-in-cheek, not satire, just a literal, almost an advertisement for puberty blockers. And I was sitting there on the couch. My fiance is watching me, like steam coming out of my ears. I could not believe what they had done. And from that moment on, I couldn't even stomach the show. And I thought about this for weeks. I was thinking about writing into the writers of the show. I didn't end up doing anything with it because it upset me so much.
Yeah.
But what has it been like as a television writer, a comedy writer, watching the way certain narratives are just superimposed onto characters or onto plots, onto narratives in a way that's so superficial and so not even human. It doesn't even attract you to the story anymore. Like, what have you noticed as someone with, like, this is your field?
Well, it's an interesting thing, but apparently the lines at Disneyland are currently very short. If you want to get on a ride, you don't really have much of a wait. You used to, but now you don't, because people are kind of staying away, and they are kind of registering their disapproval of what Disney has been up to the last few years in terms of a kind of forced diversity and a wokeism that has really kind of infiltrated all their work, especially for kids and in franchises like Star Wars and stuff like this. And I think that the reason why it's so unsuccessful and it's turning people off to such an extent is because, you know, a story like Snow White has survived for as long as it has because it's about certain fundamental things that human beings love, you know. And when you start saying, "Oh no, we're going to have the prince as a abusive white male" and stuff like that, it breaks that kind of like one of the things I tried to get across in the book, I'm not sure if I did it brilliantly, but like I think within all of us there's a kind of and I think Jung talked about this, Stella, you know better than me, or you both would know better than me, but like there's a kind of a sea of shared stories that we all have within us. And it's a very precious thing. I love it. I love that idea, and I love the fact that when I tell a story, I'm almost just kind of connecting with other people who have the same understanding of what stories should be and what makes them interesting and stuff. And I think these contracts are being broken between us and the audience, and between us and our past. Like when you change the meaning of a word as fundamental as woman, then you're doing a very kind of a rough break with everything that has come before, you know. And I think those moments are marked out in history by things like, you know, other times when there's been a kind of year zero approach to life, you know, Khmer Rouge, you know, communist regimes, whatever it happens to be. No, that's all old stuff. No, we're going into the future. This is the new us, you know. And I think it just breaks a contract with ourselves, you know. So yeah, I think wokeism. I have a feeling I'm actually bizarrely slightly optimistic about it, because, as I say, once Disney shareholders realize we need to get those lines back up again, I think that all this stuff will be reversed. And the equivalent of like the film that kind of ended the Hayes Commission censorship regime in America was Bonnie and Clyde. It came out and blew people away because the violence was so violent and the sex was so raw in it. And suddenly everyone just kind of realized, oh yeah, this is what we want. Adult stories for adults, stuff that where we can see ourselves on screen, not things where you have to put one foot on the bed or one foot on the floor if you're sitting beside a woman on a bed, which was one of the Hayes rules, Yeah.
What are you referring to? Sorry, what rules?
Sorry, I think it was called the Hayes Commission, but the Hayes rules were the ones before, like it led right up till the film Bonnie and Clyde in 1968, I think. And it was basically a set of rules that meant that all the films from around that period just before, they didn't really reflect what human beings were like. So you would, for instance, if you were, you remember old movies where there's two separate beds, like two single beds? Yeah. Those are all those rules. And, it meant that there's a period of history where the writers had to kind of write around those strictures, and everything was double entendres. And like you might remember famously Bacall and Bogart with them talking about breaking a horse. They're not really talking about breaking a horse. It's things like that. But then after that period, but like the vast majority of films were kind of neutered by these rules and were bland and boring, and it was Doris Day and all this sort of stuff. So suddenly everyone remembered why they like stories and why they like tragedies and why they like violence and strong emotions. And it led to, in the 70s, just the greatest decade of films,
Wow.
in
I
history.
didn't know any of that, but I do know Bonnie and Clyde, and what a film. I can see why it blew everybody's mind. It is violent and it's really sexy. But I can see that people said, more of this. But on that point you were making, Sasha, I remember during lockdown, my little girl used to read The Babysitter Club. And then they did a Netflix version. I could see her horror kind of going, why are they sticking in a trans kid into this? Because she knew her books and she knew the story. And it was bludgeoned in a very... And it wasn't from the books. It wasn't... Netflix were doing a television series about the Babysitter Club, and they stuck that in, not arbitrarily, but was very definitely put in. And I get the impression from you, Graham, there's a few people in the world, and I think you're one of them, that when they come across dishonesty, it's like you kind of lose your mind. It's like, that's a lie. Everybody stop everything. That's a lie. And you can't you can't kind of go forward. It's like everybody has to see there's a lie here.
Yeah,
I think that's what happened. My own little analysis of you is that's what happened to you. You kind of said, oh, no, everybody, there's a lie happening. It's like nothing can happen until we fix this. It's like there's a very funny internet meme called I think it's like a woman and she's going to bed and her husband is at the computer and she's saying, are you coming to bed? And he's going, no, something on the internet is wrong. I think that was it. Yeah. Somebody said something wrong on the internet.
And I used to, but then this happened and it was almost like the wrongness escaped the internet and it went into the worlds of medicine and academia and all these other things. And that's when I thought, oh my God, it's bigger than just something written on a blog post somewhere. It's actually infecting the world, And
it's certainly got a huge hold on many people for whom they get into the subject that become very, very obsessed. There is something about kind of gender obsession that happens to many of us. I wonder, where do you see yourself in 5 years or You know, where do you think it's going now? You, not gender. Forget about gender.
No, sure.
Yeah,
no. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I was interviewed today by RTE, and they asked a similar question, and I said, I'm hoping that journalists will start to do their jobs and cover this properly, so I can write some comedy. You know, I mean, look, if I would not have been so obsessed with this if I thought someone else was taking care of it. But, like, you know, there seems to be this mass monkey, what's that monkey see no evil thing going on with so many people that I thought, okay, well, I guess it has to be fucking me then. Like me, just to do certain things I could do. I knew I could, because I had so many followers, I could get lots of people blowing the whistle on things. I could, offer them anonymity to tell their stories. You know, I was just talking today, Stella, I don't know if you remember, but I was once in contact with a therapist who said to me that kids would come into her in tears because they had been told that J.K. Rowling wanted to kill them, you know?
God.
Yeah, that wanted them dead, wanted them to commit suicide. And she said, this therapist said to me, I can't tell them otherwise because they might report me to my accreditation body.
Oh,
you know? Yeah. And so I was hearing stories like that. I know 2 women in Scotland who are self-excluding from rape crisis services because of the culture up there. I met Keith, lovely man on Twitter, whose daughter is, breaks my heart even to think about it, is disappearing before his eyes because she's taking testosterone, And I couldn't forget these people. I couldn't I couldn't ignore what was happening to them, and and I still don't see how anyone could. I don't see how anyone could ignore these people and these stories,
I wonder, will you go back to writing comedy, or might you've been changed by this extraordinary thing you've been through? I wonder you might go a different direction.
My problem is comedy writers do best when they're just commenting and they're not really part of society. They are floating somewhere around it, sniggering at the back of the class. Unfortunately, now I'm like central to the story in a way that I never wanted to be. I've always just been fighting for my reputation and trying to counteract a picture of me that's been painted out of my most impatient or angriest moments, But, the more I was in it, the more isolated I was, the more I tried to do it, the worse things got, And I don't know, in the end, I just figure I don't think anyone could have done, I don't think there was anything I could have done differently. And unfortunately, yes, it's led me to a place where I'm in this very weird position in life. Certainly not the position you would normally associate with a comedy writer. But I will say this, the stand-up it's a good character for a stand-up. I use my own reputation to great effect with the stand-up sometimes.
What do you mean?
Well, I have a routine, for instance, about travelling home on the day of Pride.
So you do stand-up comedy a little bit?
I only recently got into it because it's the only place I could do comedy, yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So I do this occasional act at a place called the Backyard Comedy Club, which is the only place where I could do it. And I decided I'm not going to try and become a stand-up comedian because I think that I'm 55 now. I think I'm too old to do that, really. So I thought what I would do is just try and use my position to kind of just be myself on stage. And it's been going quite well, But one of the routines I had was I said that, and this is a true story, that I was once out in town, and when I was in town, it was only when I got into town that I realised it was Pride Day, And I said, I have this routine where I go, it's a bit like, for me, travelling around on Pride Day, it's like being a Jew in occupied France. And I have this routine where someone meets me and goes, so are you at Pride today? And I go, no, I wasn't. Do you not like Pride? And the punchline is he tries to catch me out by saying, we shall sing the song. I shall begin and you shall finish it. And I go, the song? And he goes, yes, the song we all now sing in schools when the parents are not informed. I'll go first. And he goes, LGBTQ. So, and what's great is, I have a lot of gay fans and friends who I've made through this, and they love that stuff, Yeah, it's nice hearing laughter and knowing I can still do it, So that's keeping me going.
I remember you once said I thought it was a sad and lovely story. You went to visit Magdalen Berns, and you rang me afterwards, and she was dying. I think she died the next day, and you said. You went into her and you can tell the story what you said. But anyway, what you said to me later, which I thought was lovely, you said, well, I made her laugh and I thought, job done. And I thought, isn't that nice? You know what I mean? You did, I know what you did. Do you remember?
No, I don't.
I do. I remember you telling me. So she was dying and you went into, I shouldn't laugh, but it was kind of bittersweet. But you went into her bed and you started saying, well, it's all so difficult and da-da-da-da-da. And she presumed it was about her. You went, no, I'm talking about me.
That's right.
And she started laughing. And then you thought to yourself, you'd set it up. And you thought, lovely, job done. And I just thought it's such a lovely gift to be a comedy writer, to think, I'm going in to make them laugh, properly laugh. To be able to do that in life, it's just a lovely, generous thing that was your mission. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make her laugh. And that's all I can do, and I'll do it. And you did. Yeah. I remember just thinking,
thanks, Stella. I forgot about that.
I remember thinking it was lovely. It was a lovely story. And I loved the idea of somebody who's dying genuinely laughing, like bursting out laughing.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Magdalen Berns, for a lot of our audience will not know who she is.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
She was a lesbian YouTuber. No, don't be sorry. I mean, it's great. It's great because she was such an important figure. She was a YouTuber back in the early days, like 2015 and 16. Yeah. And she would just make these very dry, cutting, kind of sarcastic videos pointing out the absolute lunacy of a lot of this trans stuff and men claiming to be lesbians, and this really famous Alex Drummond, I think, with the beard, calling himself a woman and saying he was queering womanhood because he fixed cars, and she would just straight face just kind of poke fun at these people, and she just had an amazing way of cutting her videos. And I think a lot of current YouTubers who I won't name kind of imitated her style. She was brilliant, and she sadly died of a brain tumor. It was something really, and she was so
around
young.
35 years old.
I remember we were doing that film in 2018, and we were at that Bristol event, and she I remember the Channel 4 people were doing all the footage, and she was kind of pushing them out of the way to get her own footage. And I remember at the time thinking, Jesus Christ, what is she doing? And I remember at the time thinking it was irritating, because it was like, let them have the good footage. A year later, when I saw us getting cut to ribbons and all that footage getting edited, I remember thinking she was dead right. She was saying, get the hell out of the way. I'm getting my own footage. I'm not relying on your footage. So, she was very forward thinking, and
she was.
Yeah,
And she was also, I'll tell you what she did, which was, which I think is why I found her so compelling, was she showed you could laugh at this stuff.
Yes.
She wasn't respectful at all.
What did she say? The minds are so open, their brains have fallen out.
She said about Stonewall, your minds are so open, your brains have fallen out. And she was also, and also, I find her battle that she had so incredibly moving, because I remember once she said to me, she thanked me for saying something. I can't remember what it was. I was doing something brilliantly noble, as I always do. And she said, "Thank you. No one listens to lesbians." You know, and it was such a simple thing, and I subsequently found out how true that, you know, no one was listening to them. Everyone was ignoring the fact that their spaces were being invaded, that they don't have dating apps anymore. You know, it was around then I started realizing, holy shit, there's no lesbian bars in California. Like in California, there's no lesbian bars. So it was things like that made me realize how, like, she, especially the kind of the grinding heel of gender ideology was really grinding down into her, and she was waging a very lonely battle. She was so impressive in so many ways. You know, she should have had she was asked to work at Google, and she turned it down. You know, she's a smart
She was very
woman.
smart. I mean, you could tell she was really smart.
Yeah.
You know, earlier, Graham, you mentioned that the way a comedy writer really shines is by kind of being on the outside of a situation, making observations, kind of making jokes about it. And of course, as we've been talking about, you're in the center of this gender thing. So you could hardly be classified as on the side. What are you on the side of that you find interesting? That, like, if you were able to get out of this gender thing and one day you're writing a comedy again, like, what are the funny cultural things that you're noticing now with a bit of distance?
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. To be honest with you, I wish I could be a little cheerier, but, like, I'm sure you feel the same way, that the recent events have been so, you know, I'll tell you what I am noticing, and I do think that there's a funny thing in here, but maybe not quite yet, but in a while. For me, the story of the last 10 years has been the story of humanity with no one at the wheel. You know, we don't really, like, we've had Biden, who doesn't know what's going on, Trump, who was in a world of his own. Over here, we have a series of kind of middle managers taking over with very little difference between the parties. There's, you know, the fact that, like, we now have a situation tomorrow in London where the people are going to be trying to observe the Remembrance Day, while at the same time there's going to be a massive demonstration for Palestine. That's going, God knows what things are going to be like at the end of this weekend, you know? And it's all because everybody just kind of absolved themselves of any responsibility for anything. You know, like Rishi Sunak, for instance. Rishi Sunak. I'm tired, so I'm saying it wrong. But he could easily by now have said, "No, sorry," and explained it for the rest of the country. Conversion therapy for gay people, that's a problem. But conversion therapy for trans people is meaningless, because it just means. It just means watchful waiting, and it means a holistic approach to a very, you know, complicated problem. He could have done that at any time, but none of them do, because they've all got this attitude of, it's just not really quite my problem.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a kind of incurious aspect to people who should know better. Journalists abdicated their responsibilities. Politicians did.
But to answer Sasha's question, you're the kind of say, nah, there's nothing else in my life. But is there a kind of, is there something, the way you went there, is it politics? Is that kind of, you know, no? You said nobody's at the wheel. Do you follow?
I know, but I don't want to drive the car either, you know. No, I want to write comedy, you know. Yeah. It's like all like.
But you are free to write comedy.
You'd be writing about the driverless car, which is a metaphor for the whole planet, is what you're kind of saying. The driverless car is here, so this is actually a perfect metaphor.
Absolutely. But then again, what's difficult is writing a comedy about the driverless car when you're in the back seat of the driverless car. And that's how I feel at the moment. I feel that the world is too chaotic and too frightening to really be able to settle down and go, well, well, let's take a sideways look at it all. You know, it's too febrile. Is that how you pronounce that? It's too febrile an atmosphere. It's too, and also, you know, I can't get anything on camera. I can't get anything on screen because I'm considered evil. You know, so I just have to. I think, unfortunately, the canoe I'm rowing is the only one I have at the moment.
Well,
you know?
this is going to be your big break because you are on gender a wider lens right now. So get ready, Graham. The fame is coming now.
I'll close the computer and just stare at my phone.
We're just coming up towards the end. Can I ask one question that's kind of itching at me? You know, earlier on you said you were bullied, and you then said, and I particularly don't like women being bullied. Why? What is the big thing about women? This white knight thing. It does feel very extraordinary.
Well, Debbie Hayden, who is my friend, despite everybody telling me I shouldn't be friends with Debbie, Debbie Hayden put it best.
A trans woman, just for
yes, a UK trans woman who is also GC, although his assistance is not always appreciated by people, which is understandable because there's been so many terrible kind of overstepping of marks in this that people don't trust Debbie, even though Debbie's been consistently on the GC side.
And even that term GC, I would say, I don't know how you think about it, Graham, but like after a lot of events from the last few days, we're just kind of, I would say GC is no longer something that I really consider myself a part of. But sorry to interrupt there. I just want to make sure to say something because a lot of fresh stuff is on my mind.
I can only contribute a bitter laugh. Now keep going.
Well, all I'll say is that the people who I've collected throughout all this, and I think, Stella, you're the same as me, are people who are individual and don't, you know, they're stubborn and they are they think about the nuance and they try and see the humanity in everyone. These are all good qualities, but I understand why some people feel they have to be put to one side to fight back against a terrible encroachment on their rights, you know? So I think Debbie understands that as well, and Debbie is sometimes quite...
But you were going to say something that Debbie Hayden said. You lined it all up.
Yeah, Debbie
about
said.
Women,
Debbie once said they're the bullies. He was talking about trans rights activists, and Debbie understands why I use male pronouns. We've spoken about this, but he was talking about trans rights activists, and he said they're the bullies even the other bullies hated at school. The bullies who bully girls. You know, and that's what it is for me. It's like it's too easy to bully girls. You know, physically, men can bully them by just standing over them. You know, they're strong. Men are stronger. Men are you know, more aggressive. Testosterone gives men what you might call a mobster's edge in life. You know, but like. And also, I think online and when people are speaking, voices are quieter. A lot of women don't feel confident enough to be forthright in certain ways. And I think it's I don't want to sound like an arsehole, but I just think it's the responsibility for those of us whose voices do carry. And you know, I have a temper. And I have to be careful of that and stuff like that. But I think it's important for us to make it safe for every voice to be heard, even if they're very quiet voices, you know. And some might see that as paternalistic, but all I see it as is an attempt to try and make it a kind of a civilized space for everybody, you know. Yeah. I mean, that might sound weird coming from me, but as I say, sometimes my anger gets the better of me because, you know, I just get insulted 100 times a day as a bigot and you know, whatever. So I don't know. I just think it's a good thing to be. I've always been. My dad always taught me hold the door open for women. You know, clean up the dishes, whatever it happens to be. Let them have a lie-in on Saturday. You know, that was there were all these things that he just did instinctively, and I think they're good practice for men. You know, so I took it online because it was like online where I was spending most of my time.
Well, I'm glad you did. I try to look at people's intentions. I mean, this came up actually a lot at GenSpect, right, Stella? Like, the intentions matter, and I think your intentions are really positive, and I'm grateful that you do whatever it is that you do, even if some people find it paternalistic. I'm really glad that you do what you do.
Thank you.
I'm proud to call you a friend. I really am.
Oh, and vice versa. Very much so. Very much so. I mean, really, in the end, my God, we've been on the right side, and we've met some incredible people. So in a way, it's been tough, but I wouldn't change it.
Well, we'll let the main audience go here. We are going to keep you on, though, because we have a special question that we ask all our guests, which is part of our dinner party conversations. And what we're trying to ascertain is, like, how do we, aside from our podcasts and our YouTube channels and our writing, how do we talk about this in real life in a way that's effective? So before we jump over there, of course, we're going to link your new book in the notes, which we hope everyone will read. You have, of course, a YouTube channel and a show that you do with Artie Morty. You guys are still doing that show, right?
And Helen Stanland,
So we'll link that. Anywhere else that you'd like our audience to go to check you out?
Please.
Substack.
Like, the Substack is basically my, like, if the book does well, that would be one thing, but the Substack is my regular income. So if people, that would be...
The book is phenomenal. And your Substack is
thank you.
The book is a really lovely book. It's a very generous book. It gives an awful lot of, insight into writing and the craft of it, and the kind of it's just a lovely book to read. I really would recommend people getting it. I just think it's a lovely read, and it gives sides to you that I know, but I think other people don't know from Twitter.
Yeah, very probably.
Does.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.